but we're going to defend the planet so we can live, and we will win. So, I need Chevron to cut the check. You owe $50 billion to indigenous communities and people that you harmed for profit.
I think one thing that often gets lost in these conversations is that some of us have to actually live the future that you all are setting on fire for us. By 2028, crop yields are already projected to begin to fail, with famine beginning to hit the world's most vulnerable populations. By 2038, current U.S. drought, fire, and extreme heat trends could potentially make whole regions of the United States unlivable if we continue the trends that lobbyists are trying to have us pursue. And we have a tipping point by 2036. We do not have the privilege or the luxury of lobbyist spin. And it is incredibly important that we don't reach net zero or in some imaginary future, but that we actually cut through to carbon emissions reductions here in the United States and globally.
Gentlelady from Michigan, Ms. Thalib is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. Mr. Woods, did Exxon help fund One Alaska? Yes or no?
I'm not familiar with that.
Well, One Alaska was a front group created specifically to oppose Alaska's ballot initiative that would require oil companies to pay their fair share. It actually received nearly $21 million in contributions. 94% of One Alaska's contributions came from 5 oil and gas companies, including Exxon and BP. So I would like to submit for the record, Madam Chair, an article, Oil Companies Spend Big to Try to Defeat Alaska's Tax Proposal.
Without objection.
Same thing in Colorado in 2018, where a measure, this is resident-led measure, ballot measure, to ban oil and gas extraction within a half a mile of homes, schools, and waterways on the ballot. That front group was called Colorado Rising. And that one, and again, resident-led, that one, Mr. Mike Wirth, I'm not even going to bother to ask if you're familiar with, because I know the answer. Many of you, all of you, helped fund some of these. I guess Chevron specifically funded $33 million behind its subsidiary, Noble Energy, contributed to that front group. Mr. Summers, are you familiar with Energy Citizens?
I am familiar with Energy Citizens, Congresswoman.
I'm glad you are. It's a front group to American Petroleum Institute. Uses it to flood Facebook with hundreds of ads opposing climate provisions in the Build Back Better Act. There, you all spent about, nearly $500,000 in misleading ads since August. Of course, when you look at these ads, y'all, the public, when you look at these ads, they don't say the name Exxon, BP, Chevron anywhere. Y'all hide and you deceive the public. So oil and gas companies can go claiming that they are pro-environment while opposing sensible pro-environment measures in secret. Lies, plain and simple. Madam Chair, in Michigan, and I'd like to submit for the record as well, Michigan utilities front groups begin misleading and campaigns ahead of a vote on energy legislation for the record.
Without objection.
There, DTE Energy and Consumers Energy used a front group called Alliance for Michigan Power and Citizens for Energizing Michigan's Economy, respectively, to target my residents and their amazing work. Amazing work. They're the ones fundraising for this, Madam Chair, to support increased rooftop solar energy. That's how they wanted to cut the energy cost so they can make a living, so they can provide a quality life for their families by reducing their reliance on corporate polluters. Mike Wirth, when are you going to cut the check?
Congresswoman, I'm not trying to understand the context of your question.
That's okay. Okay, so
could I, excuse me, I'd like to correct something that you've
sure.
been provided with some inaccurate information. Noble Energy was not a subsidiary of Chevron in 2008.
Okay, you can submit it for the record, sir. So Chevron, you can submit it to the committee. Chevron has about 70 serious cases of environmental and community abuses in 31 countries worldwide, owing over $50 billion in judgments and settlements. Checks, literally, settlement debts that you all have. So, Mike, when are you going to cut the check?
Congresswoman, I'm not familiar with the number you
When are you going to cut the $50 billion check that you owe? It went through the courts. You owe $50 billion to communities in 31 countries.
Congresswoman, I'd be happy to take a look at the source for your information on this and get back to you on it, because I have no understanding of what.
Well, I have a message for you as Chevron CEO. I mean, you made what, $29 million last year in poisoning the planet? Mr. Wirth, you can't arrest us all. You can't arrest the truth. Do you understand what I'm trying to say to you?
Congresswoman, I am not exactly following.
So you're targeting and actions against the human rights lawyer Dotzinger. I mean, what you did there, your company, maybe through subsidiaries, I don't know. I just want to remind you, there are more of us than there are of you. You can poison the planet to make money, but we're going to defend the planet so we can live, and we will win. So, I need Chevron to cut the check. You owe $50 billion to indigenous communities and people that you harmed for profit. This is not about vilifying these companies. This is about accountability. You all know we're all paying the cost, from our public health to our environment, the actions that you take, and you're hiding behind subsidiaries, and it's wrong. These are residents putting ballot initiatives on their local ballot to make a difference to save our planet. Get out of the way so they can do the work for the people in the community they live in. Thank you, and I yield.
Gentlelady yields.
Lost on me that we are having a hearing today surrounding fossil fuel misinformation and disinformation campaigns on the same day that we are scheduled to vote on legislation that has been deeply influenced by the lobbying efforts of the fossil fuel industry. It's a wonderful opportunity for us to be speaking with the CEOs of BP, Chevron, Exxon, Shell, and the American Petroleum Institute. Speaking of which, Mr. Summers, as the president of the American Petroleum Institute, part of your job is to help lobby and advocate and champion the fossil fuel industry. And that includes particularly in legislation before the United States Congress. You told CNN on television, quote, "We are leaving everything on the field here in terms of our opposition to reconciliation. We are using every tool at our disposal to work against these energy proposals." And frankly, Mr. Summers, I appreciate your candor, because most lobbying organization heads aren't as forthright and transparent about their efforts to manipulate U.S. legislation. So what does that all-out approach look like? Am I correct, Mr. Summers, that the oil and gas industry overall, including the companies that you represent and members you represent today, has spent about $55.6 million in lobbying within the last 10 months, this year alone? That figure sounds right to you, correct?
Congresswoman, thank you for your question, but let me clarify something, first of all, about who the American Petroleum Institute is. Our mission, first of all, is that we're a standard-setting organization for the global oil and gas industry. We maintain over 700 standards in the areas of health, environment, and safety. In addition to that, we advocate for the oil and gas industry.
Mr. Summers, is that figure $55.6 million in lobbying funds correct or not? I have limited time.
Congresswoman, I don't have those numbers at my disposal.
Well, according to our disclosures, that seems to be the figure, but I will move on. I would like to turn my attention to Mr., and I apologize, we just simply don't have much time allocated here. Mr. Woods, as a CEO of ExxonMobil, are you familiar with an individual by the name of Keith McCoy?
I am.
He was one of your top lobbyists, correct?
He was a senior advisor in our Washington office.
I see. Now, earlier this year, McCoy was recorded in a private session as saying, quote, "I liken lobbying to fishing. You have to bait. You throw that bait out there just to kind of reel members of Congress in, because they are a captive audience. They know that they need you and I need them." And he also alluded to having weekly calls with certain members of Congress as debates around reconciliation were being formed. Are you aware of these calls?
I'm not aware of the calls.
You are not aware of the calls. Have you participated in any calls with members of Congress throughout this process of reconciliation and infrastructure?
I have.
You have. Are political donations ever discussed during your calls with members of Congress?
No, they're not.
They are not. Does your compensation package increase as a result of the value of your compensation increase as a result of increased production from Exxon's refineries?
No, volumes from our refineries is not part of my compensation.
Is your compensation tied to Exxon's stock price?
Yes, it is.
It is, and so I would assume with increased value in Exxon's stock price and oil production, that would have a boost in the value of your compensation, correct?
My compensation is based on a number of metrics and parameters from environmental, safety, and value creation, technology development. It is a portfolio of responsibilities that the compensation committee judges me on.
Thank you very much. You know, I think one thing that often gets lost in these conversations is that some of us have to actually live the future that you all are setting on fire for us. By 2028, crop yields are already projected to begin to fail, with famine beginning to hit the world's most vulnerable populations. By 2038, current U.S. drought, fire, and extreme heat trends could potentially make whole regions of the United States unlivable if we continue the trends that lobbyists are trying to have us pursue. And we have a tipping point by 2036. We do not have the privilege or the luxury of lobbyist spin. And it is incredibly important that we don't reach net zero or in some imaginary future, but that we actually cut through to carbon emissions reductions here in the United States and globally. I submit back to the chair.